Good morning. So this is going to be a demonstration for your color study for the Great Wave assignment. Now the color study is required. You've got to do it. And it's on a very small piece of watercolor paper. This sheet of paper here is 1/4 the size, 25% the size of a full sheet of watercolor paper. So that's what your color study will be done on, okay? And your color study, just like your concept, just like your final, has to have a volcano and a great wave in it. Now, those are the only two required elements, but of course that's not enough. And I think you recognize right now, visually, there's not much interesting going on right there. So I'm going to have you add more. Remembering that the ocean is a pretty big place with great depth to it from near to far, and perhaps many different waves in it. I can have some waves very active and some waves more gentle. I'm adding some little droplets of water there. I can have lava coming out of the volcano. I'm going to switch markers now because it could be that I like the variation or the variety that a thinner marker provides. So that's called a meandering line right there that's going up. You can see by contrast it's a very thin line, and it doesn't mean that I couldn't do all my drawing with a thicker marker. It's just I want to see you manage both markers with skill. So you can do this also if you want to. I'm going to switch. I'm going to put the cap on that one nice and tight so it doesn't dry out, and I might do a variation of this. I just like that little dot thing going on, so I'm going to do that. Okay, so I'm kind of done with my planning for my color study. Okay, now these are permanent markers that I just used. So remember that when water hits that, nothing's going to happen. I also have some pencils handy. Now the paper's dry right now. That pencil point's awfully sharp, so I'm going to nip it off, break it off. I know if I push it down against the paper, it's going to break off anyway. It could be that I want to go ahead and add some pencil color right now, and I can paint over this in a little bit. So because the paper is a little bit rough to the touch, we call that roughness on watercolor paper. We call that the tooth of the paper. Watercolor papers often are a little bit rough. I'm going to go over the white paper, and you can kind of see represented here by the way the color lays down, the light and dark areas, that represents the texture or the tooth of the paper, okay? And you can do that with pencil right now, colored pencil, while the paper is nice and dry. And of course with colored pencil, just like you can with paints, you can blend colors. So here comes a little yellow on top of that. And again, there's nothing to prevent me from painting on top of that. It might be I've got a little blue here. Maybe I'll go down here into these points. I like going into the points because there's small areas. It's easy to press hard in the small area, get a nice, rich, deep, dark color, and then pull out and fade out, okay? Because I want to see you all the time, every time that you're using pencil to try to manage your shading. And that involves light, medium, and dark. Okay, now I'm going to paint right now, and I can paint right on top of this dry paper. I'm also going to demonstrate how to use kosher salt. Kosher salt adds an interesting texture to this, and so I'm going to demonstrate how to go about doing that. Kosher salt usually works very well with darker colors, so I might come in here with a purple. I'm going to go ahead and come in from my right since I'm right-handed. You notice how my left hand turns the paper so my right hand can come in here, and I can see exactly where the point, I'm coming in from my right now, where the point of that marker is going, and that placement is precise. That's exactly where I want it. And I'm also using a lot of pigment. So you be sure and be generous with the amount of pigment you're using. Remember that your brushes have to hold a point. If you dip them in the water, pull them out, pull them against the lip of the cup, or pull them against the paper towel, you should always, always, always see a point. If that brush, that watercolor brush, does not hold a point on its own, don't squeeze it, don't try to make a point, leave it alone, get another brush. If that does not hold a point, it's no good, don't use it. So I'm going to come in here with some water. I'm going to go ahead and dissolve the purple. Notice that I'm coming in from the same direction as I did before, except now that I'm using my brush, I'm placing the tip of the brush down so I can see it easily. And I'm going to put a few granules of kosher salt there when it's good and wet. And then I'm going to turn the paper around, get it out of the way, let that dry over there away from me so that I don't run my hand through it, okay? There's purple paint or pigment in the brush. I'm going to wash that out. And again, gently pull against the lip of the cup so I can remove any excess water. Because that's wet, I don't really want to work right next to it because I would be fearful of the colors running together. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it can look out of control if you're not careful. Let me come on over here with this orange. I'm going to go back into the background on top of my colored pencil. Now you can see the marker goes right over the colored pencil. The marker color is altered a little bit by the colors underneath, and that's kind of cool because watercolor marker is watercolor because it is transparent and you can see through the pigment. It does, you see, alter the color a little bit. Now again, be very generous with the amount of color you use. Snap the cap when you're done so that it doesn't dry out. I'm going to come back over here now, again from my right, because I'm right-handed. You see where I'm going to come in with my brush, and I can see exactly where the brush is going to go. And here, I'm going to change the paper direction a little bit, coming in with my brush, here, coming in with my brush. So I always will change the direction of the paper based upon what angle I need to come in on. That's going to allow me more careful placement of that brush, okay? So that explains why I continue to move the paper. Notice how I'm using the tip of the brush to fill right in there, and I'm leaving that alone. Best not to overdo it. Best to do it carefully, one time. Leave the colors nice and fresh and bold. Notice how I'm spinning this paper very cautiously, coming in again from my right so I can see exactly where that brush tip is going, coming back, filling back in, and basically leaving it alone. I can wash out the brush tip if I want to, dry it out. I suppose with a dry brush tip, if I wanted to come in here and make a few little corrections, I could, because I do have moist or damp paper and wet paint there, but that's the orange part. Now look how nicely these crystals are starting to form down here, where I use the kosher salt on top of the fairly wet watercolor paint. Now this is an interesting texture. It looks kind of bubbly. It looks kind of like a crystalline texture. You don't have to use the salt. You don't have to like the salt. If you prefer just a flat, even color like this or one that fades gradually, you go for that, okay? But this does add an extra element of texture. I'm going to continue on here. It may be that I want to go ahead and use a combination of colors this time. I'm going to go ahead and use this green right here. Okay, now remember that orange was pretty wet, so I've got to be careful not to be putting the green and the orange right together. Be super generous with that green. Snap that cap. I'm going to come in with a blue-green right now. Those two should go along well with each other. Maybe the blue-green. See how I'm using the side of the marker right there to get these big, bold bands of color, being super, super, super generous with the colors. Notice how I'm coming in, turning the paper so I can more easily get the color, the tip of the marker, exactly where I want it, the color exactly where I want it, okay? And now I'm going to snap that cap. I think that's pretty generous with the amount of colors. And go back in here with my watercolor brush. I've got a big area here if you look at it, so having a little extra watercolor in the brush is not going to hurt a thing. Therefore, I didn't take out very much water. You can see how I use the brush for precise movement. I'm going to come over here now and start to dissolve these areas, get them to move. I think maybe this is prime for some salt here in a little bit. I'm going to come up here. Sometimes I like leaving a little white in my picture like this right here, so I might just leave that right there because I kind of like it. Looks like a flash of bright sunlight. I'm gonna come over here and catch this right now. Boy, am I being careful. This is more careful than I usually am, let me tell you. Let's sprinkle some salt down and give that a chance to work. You can see not bad. Where I might want to go ahead and take some of this color. Now there's a little puddle right there. Watch what I do. I don't want that puddle to go running. So I'm going to pull out all the water from my brush. I'm going to dry the brush out really good. The brush is good and dry, and I'm just going to lay the brush in that little puddle, pick up that little puddle so it doesn't go running everywhere. Maybe even use the paint that's in the puddle to do a little touch up here and there. Okay, take some of that paint right over here. It's going to be a light paint, but that's okay. Now, this light green over here doesn't have to stay light green, but you can see how you can easily fade the color out to white. I just washed my brush to get all the excess pigment out of my brush, and there's a gradual fade right there. Not to white, but to a very light blue. So again, you can begin to see in a few places, it's very subtle. Don't really notice it, the salt taking effect. Now you notice that I'm working very cleanly and I have very good control over the placement of my color, and I have very good control over the blends of my color, and I have very good control over the dark to light shading of my color, like right here. So guess what? These are all qualities that I expect to see from you. So you're not scrubbing the floor, you're not going back and forth like this. You're gently moistening the paint, wetting the paint, redissolving the paint, dragging it back and forth gently, not rapidly, but slowly. Again, you're not scrubbing the floor, okay? And you're maintaining the point on the brush, and you're doing this with real obvious control, okay? Not quite finished here. Can let this dry, can go back with pencil on top, can go back with Sharpie marker on top, can go back with watercolor paint on top. Now, you try.